Today we get a look at our white rare land, a thieving coin flipping counterspell, and a bunch more. So let's talk some Modern Horizons 3. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Modern Horizons 3 spoilers. So today, not the biggest spoiler day of all time, it's a holiday, so we don't have a ridiculous number of cards, but we still have some super sweet ones to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking spicy new Modern cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Second, if you need any of these cards, you can pre-order them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Anyway, let's talk Modern Horizons 3. First up today, we get the white member of the rare land cycle in Monumental Stonerow. So Monumental Stonerow, it's a land. It comes into play tapped unless you control the planes. It taps for a white, and its ability is pay 4 and tap it. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You can reveal a historic card from among them. Put them in your hand. The rest go on the bottom of your library in a random order. So artifacts, legends, and sagas are historic. So this reminds me a lot of the castle cycle, honestly, from Eldraine. Castle Lochwain draws a card for less mana, but you lose life. Castle Vantress, Scries 2, which isn't quite drawing a card for the same right. So Monumental Stonerow, I think this card has a chance to see play. The question's going to be, what decks can support it? So obviously, if you're going to get value out of this card, you need a reasonable number of historic cards in your deck. And I actually tried to math this out a little bit. So let's say you have 12 historic cards in your deck. You will draw a card with Monumental Stonerow about 2/3 of the time, right around 67% of the time. If you want to get it up to 90% of the time, where you're pretty much never going to whiff, then you need like 21, maybe 20 historic cards in your deck, which there are decks that can do this. So you need to be a white heavy deck with, I would say, at a minimum like 15 historic permanents, ideally closer to 20 historic permanents, and then you're kind of in business with this card, where it's going to be drawing you a card repeatedly, and the more historic cards you have, the more likely you are to get some card selection out of this, where you get to choose between multiple historic cards and grab the best one. So where could you possibly play this card? My first question was, can control decks play it? Because effects like this are really good in control, right? Because you can leave up your mana during your opponent's turn, and if you need to counter something or kill something, you can, and then if you don't need to do that, you're like, okay, on your end step, Monumental Stonerow, dig 5 deep, grab a historic card, generate some card advantage, similar to how you'd use like Castle Vantress. That's kind of how Castle Vantress is played. And I think that the answer is maybe, but you're gonna have to do a little deck building work to make it work. So if you look at a typical control deck in Modern, you're gonna have Teferi Time Raveler, probably Narset Parter Veils, probably 4 One Rings, maybe some legendary lands like Gaia Reach Sanitarium, Manamo, which is an easy way to kind of up your historic count a little bit. A control deck in its current form, you're probably going to be right around 12 historic permanents, which puts you in the like, it's okay, but I'm going to whiff like 1 out of every 3 activations. But maybe that's fine if you're just like doing it on your opponent's end step, and you know sometimes you're going to whiff, but sometimes you're going to get a Teferi or a One Ring or something really, really strong. The other direction to go with this card is playing a deck that's just overflowing with artifacts in specific. Something like a Thopter Sword combo is just overloaded with historic permanents. Their whole deck is essentially historic permanents. So in a deck like that, you're pretty much never going to whiff. The question's going to be, can you make the mana work? Is it going to be fast enough for what you're trying to do? But I think I'd play like a copy or 2 in a deck like that. Also possible that it shows up in something like Hammer Time. Hammer Time tends to be mono white. It's got a bunch of artifacts in it with all of its equipments and Esper Sentinels and Ornithopters. So it seems like a nice like late game plan for the Hammer Time deck. When things go wrong and you don't get that super fast kill, this is a way you can kind of rebuild, fight through your opponent's interaction. So I think it should see play there. So there's certainly homes for this card. The other place I think this card can be very, very good, and I will play it a lot, is in Commander, especially in like 2-color and mono-color decks that meet its requirements. So artifact decks, that's a easy options. Osgir, Teshar, Urza, they all tend to be artifact decks. They're gonna have a ton of historic permanents, and they're only 2 colors, so you can have plenty of room to play this as a utility land. The other place that would be really solid is in legendary decks, like Joda, Ratadrobic, Samwise, because legends are also historic. I don't know if it actually makes a cut in something like Joda. Like, can you actually play this in a 5-color deck? Probably not. But in a 2-color deck like Ratadrobic or Samwise, the card seems really, really good. So Monumental Stonerow, really solid card. lands that draw cards tend to be pretty good. Yes, this one is expensive. 4+ tapping means you're paying 5 mana to draw a single card, so it's not going to be your primary plan. It's not like this is what you want to be spending your turn doing, but as a, like, I can rebuild after a sweeper, or I can do something when I have nothing going on, I think this card certainly serves a purpose in certain decks in Modern, and definitely in Commander. We also got a new black self-mill enchantment in Ripples of Undeath. So Ripples of Undeath, 2-mana enchantment, says at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, mill 3 cards, then you can pay 1 in 3 life, and if you do, put a card from among those cards into your hand. So Ripples of Undeath, it's kind of like a cheaper Cemetery Tampering or Wrenn and Realmbreaker's -2 ability. As long as it sits out on the battlefield, every single turn, it's going to fill your graveyard, and then if you mill something you want, 1 mana and 3 life to get that card, and it's kind of a lot, but still, it's going to be worth it if you mill something really, really good. So my concern with this card in Modern is it might just be too slow. When I think of Modern playable self-mill, I'm thinking of like Stitcher Supplier, Shriekhorn, Felicia Archaeologist. The problem with Ripples of Undeath is you don't get the first mill until your next pre-combat main phase, so it does nothing the turn it comes into play, and then if you want to generate card advantage with it, 3 life and a mana is kind of a big cost. Remember, we're playing Modern. In Modern, you start at 20 life, but really in a lot of decks it's like 15 life when you count fetch lands and shock lands and so forth. 3 life is a huge chunk of that, so it's not like you can just do it every single turn and turn it into like this weird graveyard filling Phyrexian arena. So what this card really wants is some sort of like slow, grindy, mid-rangey graveyard deck. That's where this card would really shine, and I just don't know if we have that in Modern. In Modern we have these like fast reanimated Atroxin, kill you style graveyard decks rather than these slow, grindy, mid-range style decks. Also a little concerned of just how it lines up with the popular cards in the format. Like, everyone's playing Pick Your Poison because it's really good against the One Ring, and this just easily gets sniped by Pick Your Poison, and it's one of those cards that needs to sit out on the battlefield for a few turns to really do its job. So, cool design, and I like the card, and I do want to build around it, but I expect that it might be just a little too slow for Modern. It is worth mentioning, it does work through Rest in Peace and Leyline of the Void, one of those weird counterintuitive rules quirks. So let's see if Ripples out, but there's a Rest in Peace out. You mill 3 cards, your cards are going to go to exile instead of the graveyard, but you can still pay a mana in 3 life and put one of those cards in your hand if you want to, because Ripples doesn't actually care where the card ends up. It just cared that you milled it, and it was one of the cards that it milled. So it is cute that it works through Graveyard Hate. So Modern, we'll have to wait and see. Where I think this card is definitely going to be good, though, is in Commander. In self-mill Commander decks, especially ones like Anakthea, which specifically cares about enchantments, this card seems really strong. In Commander, you got 40 life, so paying 3 to draw a card, not as big of a deal. You end up with this kind of expensive but graveyard filling Phyrexian arena. And then in decks like Anakthea or Madrotha or Sidisi or the Micro Tyrant, this is just a really easy way to consistently fill your graveyard and support your game plan. So Ripples of Undeath, I like the design of this card. I would love for this card to be good in Modern. I think it's probably just too slow and disruptible, but in Commander it seems really powerful. We also got a card that I need your opinion on, because I cannot make up my mind if this card is incredibly broken or still unplayable, and that card is Invert Polarity. So Invert Polarity is double blue and red, so 3 mana is an instant. It says choose target spell and then flip a coin. If you win the flip, gain control of that spell, and you can choose new targets for it. If you lose the flip, counter that spell. So this is literally heads I win, tails you lose. If you think about what this card does, its floor is, you lose the roll and it's a cancel. And a hard to cast cancel, like Is It Mana, all colored mana, is not a Modern playable card. There is no way you're playing 3 mana Is It cancel in Modern. On the other hand, if you win the flip and you get to gain control of the spell, then this is 3 mana Commandeer, which is ridiculously good. Like, if this was just 3 mana gain control of a spell, I think it would be easy Modern stable. It's got the coin flip mixed in though, so 50% of the time, it's a stone unplayable cancel. The other 50% of the time, it's a super bomby Commandeer. And why is this card so exciting? I think some people glossed over this. So this doesn't just work with instants and sorceries. This works with literally any spell. So if your opponent casts a Tarmogoyf and you invert polarity it and you win the flip, you get the Tarmogoyf. If they One Ring, and you win the flip, you get the One Ring. If they Karn Liberated and you win the flip, you get the Karn Liberated. So 3 mana to be able to just steal a spell off the stack, that is way cheaper than we've ever seen this effect before. But again, it's got the coin flip thrown in, and that's the one thing that like gives me pause as to whether this will really be that good in Modern, is coin flip cards don't really have a long track record of being successful. Competitive Modern players, they want to know what their cards do, right? They don't want a 50% chance. Although, as we talked about before, the floor isn't horrible. Like, it's horrible in the sense that it's a cancel and you wouldn't play cancel in Modern, but you're still countering that spell. It's not like if you win the flip, you get to control the spell, but if you lose the flip, it resolves, or your opponent gets 2 of that. You copy it and your opponent gets it or something. So the downside is still countering the spell. There is one type of spell where it's kind of a drawback, and that's going to be against sweepers. Like if your opponent Toxic Deluges or Farewells, if you win the flip, well, you still got a Farewell or Toxic Deluge, so you don't actually get to stop it. So in that case, you're hoping to lose the flip, most likely, to hard counter it. So there's a bunch of just weirdness with this card. As far as where this could fit, there is like an Is It control deck in Modern. It's got Flame of Venor, it's got Archmage's Charm in the 3-drop side, it's got Snapcaster Mage. I imagine it would be pretty appealing to just be like, steal your One Ring, steal your Karn. Like, the upside of the card's so high. How does it fit with the rest of these cards? Is it going to beat out Archmage's Charm? Is it going to beat out Flame of Venor? That's where it becomes a little bit sketchy, but that's the kind of deck I could see this working in. In Commander, seems really good in coin flipping decks. Like, it supports the theme of your deck. So if you're an Oaken and Zenderspit player, you're probably going to play Invert Polarity, but it might just be good enough to play in random decks. In Commander, I used to love Spelljack. Like, when I first started playing Commander, 15 years ago or whatever, I would jam Spelljack in so many of my blue decks, because the idea of just like countering a thing and then getting to steal it rather than put it in the graveyard just seems so much fun. Same with like Ether Snatch. The thing is, those cards are just so expensive. At 6 mana, it's just way, way, way too much. It's too hard to leave up 6 mana in hopes of finding something good to steal. Invert Polarity really changes the equation though, because it's only 3 mana, which is like 1 mana more than you want to pay for a counter in Commander, really. But at 3 mana in Commander, it's perfectly fine. And then if you win the flip, you get the upside of stealing it. If you lose the flip, well, you countered it anyway. So I think this is a card that you could jam in basically any deck, but I expect it to show up the most in kind of like controlling spells on your decks, like Niv Mizzet Perun, can show up in like Bellamore. Also cute in Theft style decks if part of your game plan is to benefit from stealing your opponent's permanents. It's not like a super big color for Theft decks, but like Marchesa the Black Rose is sometimes built as a Theft deck, Zara Renegade Recruiter. So Invert Polarity, I want to know what you think about this card in Modern. Is this card incredibly broken because it can steal a Karn or an Ulamog or a One Ring for just 3 mana? Or is this card incredibly unplayable because it can also be a cancel for 3 mana, which is just not a good Modern card? Let me know what you think about this one in the comments, because I honestly just haven't made up my mind yet. In the world of lower rarity cards, there's a couple deserving of a shout out, starting with Static Prison. So Static Prison, 1 mana white enchantment, says when it enters the battlefield, you exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield, and you get 2 energy. And at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, sacrifice it unless you pay an energy. So Static Prison, by itself, with no additional energy support, not going to be good enough, right? You temporarily get rid of something, but then you run out of energy and it comes back. But if you can make energy, this is essentially Leyline Binding for an energy deck, and we've seen Leyline Binding be really, really great in Modern. I will say Static Prison, a little bit worse, even outside of the energy thing, because it dies to stuff like Engineered Explosives, Leyline Binding does it, but still it's very close to the same card. So I feel like this could be staple level removal for a deck that can afford and produce enough energy to keep it on the battlefield for the rest of the game. The other thing is, Modern games don't always last that long. So if you're going to be able to close out the game in 2 or 3 turns maybe, you don't need that much energy to make Static Prison into a hard removal spell. So I think the card has potential to be really good, but you pretty much got to be an energy deck. We also got one of the spicier sagas we've seen in a while in the Creation of Avacyn. So Creation of Avacyn, 3 mana black saga. It says search your library for a card, exile it face down, and then shuffle. That's lore counter number 1. Lore counter number 2, you turn the exiled card face up. If it's a creature, you lose life equal to its mana value. And then lore counter number 3, you may put the exiled card onto the battlefield if it's a creature card. If you don't, you put it into your hand. So this card is very, very strange. It's a saga where the first 2 lore counters don't really do anything. The first one thins your deck, I guess. The second one probably loses you the life. But if you make it all the way to the end, this card can be ridiculous. So its floor is a 3-mana tutor with like suspend 2. You play this, you exile your Wrath or whatever, you wait until you get to the 3rd lore counter, you put it into your hand. The huge upside is, if you tutor up a creature, you can put it into play. The downside is that 2nd lore counter is a lot of life, but this is a 3-mana enchantment that if you can wait a couple of turns and survive losing 15 life, can put Emrakul the Aeon's Torn into play, which is kind of wild. So I gotta say, I would be surprised if this card was actually good enough for Modern. I feel like it's probably too slow, and the life loss does make it a little tricky to cheat something massive into play. One of the tricks people mention is trying to proliferate kind of past the 2nd lore counter, and I want to talk through this because it's not super intuitive, and it doesn't work quite as well as you want. So let's say you play the Creation of Avacyn. The 1st lore counter, you exile Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, whatever your finisher is. The next turn, you go to the 2nd lore counter, and then with that trigger on the stack, the lose life equal to the creature's mana value when you flip it face up, you proliferate to get to the 3rd lore counter. The 3rd lore counter will resolve before the 2nd lore counter, and that's the one that says, oh, if it's a creature, put it on the battlefield, otherwise put it in your hand. The problem with this plan is the creature will be face down because the 2nd lore counter hasn't resolved yet. So as far as the game's concerned, this face down card isn't a creature, so even if it technically is a creature that's face down, you're not going to be able to get into play. So what would happen in this scenario is the Emrakul would just end up going into your hand. You wouldn't lose any life, but it would go into your hand. So I don't think it really works for cheating Emrakul into play, although proliferating could turn it into a faster tutor. Although I guess if you're trying to tutor, you might as well just like cast a Grim Tutor or something. So I don't know, the card's really neat. Maybe there's some value for cheating cheaper things into play that aren't going to lose you as much life, but still, like, it's kind of turn 5 reanimation in a weird way. Like, when you think through the actual speed of this, you play it on turn 3, turn 4 you go to lore counter 2, turn 5 you put the thing into play. At that rate, you might as well just like cast a real reanimation spell, although it is cool that it tutors the thing out of your deck. So Creation of Avacyn, I love the design of this card. The sagas are awesome, and this is an awesome saga. I expect it's probably not really a super competitive card, but it is super cool. Might be a good against the odds card at least. We also got our exclusive MTG Goldfish preview card for the set, which Tomer covered in full over on the MTG Goldfish Commander channel, so definitely check that video out. And that card is Consuming Corruption. So Consuming Corruption, double black instant, and it says it deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you gain X life, where X is the number of swamps you control. This card, it's so close to being good. The one home I could think of for it is maybe like mono black coffers in Modern. The thing is, especially with the new Necro running around in the One Ring, I think March of Wretched Sorrow is probably just a better version, but it's worth keeping in mind if you got a lot of swamps and you need to kill something and maybe buffer your life total a bit. Otherwise, of course, a couple of draft chafty cards. You can check them out over at mtgpreviews.com. I do have to say, Raul and Implicit Maze, all these sagas that line up with the Flipwalkers have seemed really sweet and like kind of powerful. Raul and Implicit Maze, though, my god, this might be my pick for worst uncommon from the set. Like, its effect's not bad. Like, it's a one-sided Pyroclasm into some Impulse Draw into making a Spellgorger weird. The problem is it's 5 mana. I feel like this, if it wanted to be a somewhat real card, needed to be like 3 mana, and maybe it could see play. At 2 mana, it would probably be like kind of busted and like really strong. But at 5 mana, I don't even know if you play this in draft at 5 mana. It just seems, I don't know. I imagine this is one of those cards that like maybe they tested it much cheaper and it was really good. So like, you know what? We don't want to deal with this. Let's just add like 3 more mana to it and call it a day. But the end result is, my goodness, a really underpowered card. Anyway, those have been our daily Modern Horizons 3 spoilers for today. So let me know what you think about all these sweet cards in the comments. We have a couple of more days of main set spoilers to go, and tomorrow pre-con spoilers for the Commander decks kick off in earnest. You can find them all over at the MTG Goldfish Commander channel. Anyway, everyone, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back tomorrow with more Modern Horizons 3 spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, you can find yesterday's daily spoiler video here, or maybe the video where we ranked all the in-the-game cards in Magic.